Okay, today I just wanted to talk about these flex hones, and this isn't a flex hone, but um, we'll get to that here in a little bit. The only time you should be using this kind of hone is if you're trying to remove material from the cylinder, and it depends on what kind of engine you're messing with. So if it's an old school engine, then um, you want to be using a little bit more aggressive stone, and if it's a newer style engine, you want to be going to a little uh, more fine stone. So I would say like a 320. And then you have these ones. So, I mean, we'll continue on here. I'm just trying to go through here and show you what we have through here. They have some brushes in here too, like the flex zones I was talking about earlier. Obviously, if you're just taking an engine apart to clean it up and re-ring it, and it's a Molly ring, and it's like say an LS engine with small rings, 320 grit flex hone would be the way to go. For anything else, you want to remove material, then this would be the way to go. And when you use this, you should do it in multiple steps, and we'll go over that here in a second. You can get the actual flex hone, or this is on tooldiscounter.com. Um, I just wanted to talk about the cylinder here real quick. The cylinder here has some shadows in it, but you can still see that there's some cross ash left. This is the kind of cylinder I would probably, well, I would measure it obviously with a bore gauge or some kind of measuring tool. And then I would probably use a flex hone on this if I was just going to re-ring it, if the cylinder was still straight. But anyways, moving on Engine Builder Magazine.com, they kind of give you some tips on how to, hone a cylinder depending on what you're doing and whatever. There's a special tool called a profilometer that reads all of these. Nowadays they want you to have these if you're honing cylinders so you can keep everything in check so that ring lives a long life. But if you don't have one of those, then you can just kind of go off their guidelines. Remind, they just talk about um, ring manufacturers, the best surface vision often achieved by rough boring cylinders within 5 thousandths of its final destination, or rough honing within 3 thousandths to final size, then honing again with 220. So probably what they're talking about is maybe a 180, and then they do a 220, and then they leave about a thousandths, and then they run these up and down to take out the last bit. So 220. Um, so technically, you'd be honing it 3 times. So you'd be obviously using the 180, then using the 220, then using either a 280 or a 400. And what that means is it's just plateauing the cylinder wall because it's nice. So it's nice and um, sorry, my throat's really messed up today. Finishing with a 400, so you have what they call a plateau. So what plateau honing is obviously moving the stones around to get the cylinder smoother, because then the rings will seal better. So moving on, down here they talk about cast iron chrome rings can tolerate somewhat rougher finish. So a 220 finish on like an old school big block or a small block with big thick rings in it, you'd probably be wanting to use a 220. And then people with fancy diamond stones, they start out at like a 325 or a 400. Then they typically finish with a 600. So it just depends on who's doing what and if they have, um, a good, um, what they're actually using. So then they also talk about Pro Stock or NASCAR motors are 4 to 6 RPK, RK, RVK. Achieve these numbers, the bore hone to size at 270 to 320. Metal bonded diamond stone, 170 RPM, 35% load. The stones are changed to a 600 grit diamond stone, 20% load. Then the final step to a brush cylinder with a plateau hone. So they like to keep them pretty smooth. Anyways, moving on. Wanted to show this video here of this guy honing the cylinder. So this is a torque plate. This simulates the cylinder head being on the engine when he's honing it, so all the cylinders are straight. You do not have to do this. They don't do this from the factory, but it is the best way to hone a block. Now, if you'll see, he'll reach over here in a minute and grab this button, and what that's doing is dwelling at the bottom of the cylinders because it's kind of tight.
That change in sound is the feed handle came out to the 0, and now it went into its finishing mode. I'm going to increase that.
So pretty much what's going on here with these numbers is the machine starts and it kind of, this is tension here, and then you see these dots all the way at the bottom of the cylinders. That means that the cylinders are tighter down here than it is at the middle and the top of the cylinder. So sometimes what you'll have to do is you'll have to dwell. What dwell means is the machine kind of stops at the very bottom and hones, and then you just run it for a little bit. You stop at the very bottom and then run it through, and then it'll straighten the cylinder out at the bottom.
Up to 20, and so now when the average of these lines gets down to 20, the machine will shut off. Now what I was doing there with that other button is that dwells at the bottom of the stroke. What I had noticed is we were getting a lot more load at the bottom of the cylinder than we are up here at the top. So that's why I touched that particular button.
Okay, so we pretty much get it. I mean, this thing's pretty much doing everything for him. It's kind of weird because, I don't understand. I mean, you can put these things in here. These are old machines, they have CNC equipment now and everything else. The Rattler's all CNC, but I'm not saying this is a bad equipment. I'm just saying, that everything has advanced. So anyways, moving on. This is the break-in oil. I like to use break-in oil because it's a mineral-based oil and it helps everything seal up. I run this stuff, and I also run the driven stuff. So as far as break-in time goes on rings, that's, I don't think you need no 400 miles. This thing will say one night at the racetrack. And then down here, it says 2 hours of break-in dyno time to break it in. So it all depends what you're doing with your engine. If it's turbocharged engine, it's best to fire the engine up, get it up to the operating temperature. I usually fire an engine up and I rev it up to at least 1200 RPMs, if not 2000. But if it has forged pistons in it, I usually only rev it up to 1200 until those pistons expand. And then I can, run it up to 2000 and kind of rock it back and forth from 800 to 2000 once you get a little heat into it. And then what I'll do is I'll go out and drive it, and I'll just put a load on it, go out and drive it for 20 minutes or so up and down the road with a load, and load, not babying on it, but just putting an engine load on it. And then maybe I'll stop, come to a dead stop, and kind of floor it and run it up to 4,000 RPMs, and then let off, and then kind of do the same thing, probably 10 times or so, and the rings are probably sealed. But after that, then I just drive it around, and I don't really beat on it, but I don't really baby on it either. I just make sure there's a load on the engine. Drive that thing for 100 miles like that, or even 200. Check the oil at 100 and just see how dirty it is. And if it's dirty, change it. As far as going to synthetic or sticking with something else, I mean, I always like to run this oil for a little longer. I'd rather have a non-synthetic oil in it for a little longer, then switch to a synthetic after that. But it just depends on what you're doing. You know, we have engines that have um, VR1 Valvoline in them, and that's not a synthetic oil. So we broke it in on this VR stuff. We ran a couple hundred miles on it, then we switched to the VR1, and it's been great. You know, so just depends on what oil you really want to run. Difference in rings. I think I've already gone over this in other videos, but um, plasma moly ductile is kind of like the go-to, and then you have, you know, the other ones that have the stainless steel top, and then a Napier second. Let's see if this is Napier or not. Ductile iron, it doesn't say. But anyways, a Napier ring's always good on the second because it helps scrape oil off the cylinder. I've been using Napier rings forever. Hastings is a pretty good company for rings. I mean, obviously there's Total Seal, there's other brands out there. But if you go on the Hastings website, you can pretty much find whatever rings you want if you know what you're looking for. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Just kind of wanted to go over the honing technology and what it's used for. And you guys can hone your own blocks if you're careful, and, you know, save yourself some money if you want to buy all the tools and do it yourself.